In their article, Pedagogical Choices and Focus on Form, Catherine Doughty and Jessica Williams say that being teachers of English as a foreign language, it is our goal to teach English for communication, or in other words, work on development of the communicative competence. Leaving learners to themselves is not the best plan. Some things need focus and others not. This presentation will show what the authors Doughty and Williams find as important to consider in the matter of focusing on form in the classroom. Doughty and Williams divide the pedagogical choices into 6 different considerations, which are whether or not to focus on form, reactive versus proactive focus on form, the choice of linguistic form, explicitness of focus on form, sequential versus integrated focus on form, and the role of focus on form in the curriculum. Let's have a look at them one by one. Decision number 1, whether or not to focus on form. Some features of form are so easy to learn and at the same time noticeable for the learner. Most researchers agree that there is no use for teachers focusing on these features, since it would only be wasting time. On the other hand, there are some features which are quite impermeable, and this would also be only time-consuming without any development in communication. When learning a second language, the learner will have a language called interlanguage. This is the language which the student has on its way to the target language. The interlanguage will be restructured over and over again as the student has new input and focuses on form. When it comes to universal grammar, some researchers claim that there is no need for explicit instruction. Cook says, as universal grammar in the student's mind is so powerful, there is comparatively little for the teachers to do. Meanwhile, other researchers say that we still don't know exactly what is included in the universal grammar, so teachers still need to trigger the interlanguage. In addition, adult second language acquisition is not the same as first language acquisition for children. Therefore, Cook is not right, and although it is difficult, if not impossible, for second language learners to become as native speakers, they can still become fluent and accurate target language users. When the teacher has a non-interventionist position, there is no focus on form. Krashen divides learning a language into consciously and unconsciously language learning. Further on, claiming that only unconsciously learned language can become fluent. Language learning, which is conscious, will be more deliberate and less fluent. The non-interventionist theory further says that the only effective kind of learning is learning that occurs without conscious awareness and without tangible understanding. Not all agree with the non-interventionist position. A reaction to the non-interventionist position is the multiple representation, which says both implicitly and explicitly processed instances of a linguistic feature can be stored as implicit knowledge, and success depends on what kind of cognitive processing engages the implicitly or explicitly stored language knowledge. Researchers do not agree with each other. Meanwhile, it is interesting to read this quote by Doughty and Williams on page 204. No one kind of learning is claimed to lead to a particular kind of knowledge representation. All internalized linguistic knowledge is always moving in the direction of more analyzed, detailed, and target-like representation. So to conclude on whether or not to focus on form, teacher can depend on learners' cognitive processing capabilities to integrate explicitly learned and represented knowledge into the developing interlanguage system, thus permitting a role of focus on form in instruction. Decision number 2, reactive versus proactive focus on form. Proactive means that the teacher plans that the focus on form will occur, while the teacher that has a reactive focus on form has to be ready to teach whatever comes up of need on the spot. This puts a high requirement on the teacher to be able to be on demand. There has been little research or classroom studies on effectiveness of completely unplanned instructional intervention. Long argues that when it comes to reactive, it is important to consider the student's readiness. When wanting to teach only the next stage of development, Lightbrown says there are some constraints. 1. There is usually a wide range of learner abilities. 2. Some learners can internalize the input for further restructuring of interlanguage, although what is taught is not the next step. 3. Although the student does not show control of the step, the student acquires the knowledge before having control over it, so they might have acquired the knowledge without the teacher knowing it yet. And finally, 4. Focus on form makes the students noticing the forms later, and it facilitates the internalization of the input. Some constraints of readiness in the group may be different abilities or different first languages. Lister and Ranta talk about different responses to learner error in reactive and proactive focus on form. The less effective and most widespread is recasts. The most effective is giving metalinguistic clues, clarifications requests, repetition of learner errors, and teacher elicitation of a repaired response. The proactive approach is therefore more feasible. The students are better informed and know what to focus on and percept. When it comes to generalization, the learners are in process, and when they overgeneralize, it is a very effective technique to point out the error at the moment. This would be a reactive focus on form. The proactive stance has one big obstacle. It is very difficult to plan for a certain form to arise in a communicative task. Loshi and Blaivraman say that there are 3 degrees of involvement of a linguistic form in a task. They are task naturalness, task utility, and task essential. During a task naturalness, the grammatical construction may arise naturally, but not necessarily. The best tasks here are production tasks. Task utility are tasks where it is possible to complete the task with or without the structure. Comprehension tasks are good utility tasks. Task essentials are tasks where the task cannot be successfully performed unless the structure is used. These tasks are very good for focus on form, but are very difficult to make. The conclusion is that both proactive and reactive stances are good. It all depends on classroom circumstances. Decision number 3, choice of linguistic form. The same instruction should not be applied to all forms, including focus on form. Focus on form include lexical grammar, higher level of organizational principles, and rules of normative patterns. In addition, language use beyond sentence level. The best approach of lexical learning is extensive reading, says Krashen. In contradiction, Paribach and Vesche and Zimmerman. Decision number 3, choice of linguistic form. The same instruction should not be applied to all forms, including focus on form. Focus on form include lexical, grammar, higher level of organizational principles and rules, and normative patterns. In addition, language use beyond sentence level. The best approach of lexical learning is extensive reading, says Krashen. In contradiction, Paribach and Wesche and Zimmerman claim there is evidence of superiority of reading plus contextualized vocabulary instruction over reading alone. It is important to understand why a learning difficulty is difficult before attending to teach and instruct. The teachers must make sure the students are ready to apprehend what they wish to focus on. Unless this is done, it will be inutile. Unfortunately, research often produces conflicting results. Some say it is okay to skip a step, while others say that it is not possible to skip a step. No matter which research you rely on, they all agree that it is not possible to skip an entire stage. Important questions are: what makes one form easier to learn than another? Why one before the other? Pieneman and Johnston have found that constructions that involve little manipulation of elements or little demand on short-term memory tend to be acquired early. Clare again says that it is not possible to learn and therefore not possible to teach a structure that lies within a stage far beyond the learner's stage. Some do not agree and say in the long term it may be possible to take notice when teaching further stages. The repeating problem is that there is not enough research on the area. Some lexical meaning may be acquired easier than others. Bardo v. Harlig found that there are 3 lexical verb classes, and they are achievement verbs, which are verbs with an endpoint like find something, accomplishment verbs, which are verbs with endpoint and duration, eat dinner, and finally activity verbs with a duration like eat. The achievement verbs were the easiest to learn, while the activity verbs were the hardest. Formal instruction cannot change the route of development, but it may accelerate progress through acquisition order. Ekman, Bell, and Nelson have concluded that structures that are rare across languages are likely to be acquired late, while those that are relatively common will be acquired early. When the forms are related, it is possible to teach the most difficult form first, and the easier ones will follow easy. Some unrelated target forms seem to be acquired earlier than others. Reasons for this can be the salient in input, the communicative function, and that the easier rules are learned before the harder ones. An example is, it is easier to learn to swap subject-verbal for interrogative sentences in Swedish than in other contexts because the learners perceive a pragmatic function. There are different ways of seeing a rule as difficult. It could be that it is difficult to explain the form-function relationship is difficult. And at last, some rules are easy to understand but difficult to produce. Sometimes it is easier to focus on lexical learning. It is easier to memorize, in example, gender, than to go through the rules. Harley found that her learners probably improved performance through item learning rather than system learning. Sometimes distinctions in the second language do not exist in the first language, then it is necessary to intervene. The best is then to give a few rules of thumb and couple it with repeated exposure to illustrate examples. Grammar with high reliability, say with few exceptions, is easier to learn. Holstein says that when the second language is inconsistent, it presents greater difficulties for the learner. Pica suggests that the acquisition of easy rules, non-salient forms, will most likely benefit from instruction. On the other hand, Holstein and de Graaf say that easy rules are so easy that the learners will discover them on their own, and it is a waste of time for teachers to focus on them. So the teacher has 2 choices: either to teach the easy rules or to teach the hard rules and expect the easy rules to be done by themselves. Time is limited in class. The teacher needs to help the students to figure things out. The first language will influence the interlanguage. The interlanguage with the universal grammar can stop the development in target language. The learner needs to notice that a form in interlanguage does not exist in the second language. In this case, according to White, explicit and negative evidence may be required and helpful.